What is up, everybody, and welcome to episode 25 of the Gridiron Across the U.S. podcast. Today we have a very special episode. We are live from the University of Iowa and their School of Journalism and Mass Communications, and we are joined by a guest speaker, Adam Kempenaar. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Adam Kempenaar. I'm a professor here at the University of Iowa and have been teaching at the Iowa Summer Journalism Workshop this week, where I've had the pleasure of having you two as students.
So, Adam, you've worked in the front office for the Chicago Blackhawks. You were the VP of Marketing and Content at one point. What would you say, you worked there for about 20 years, through the rise of social media, what's the biggest change you've seen in the sports marketing world over the span of your career?
Great question. I think there's a lot, right? First of all, just the fact that there has been such a proliferation of the number of channels. And we talked about this even in class this week, right? When I started, I was the web producer, which meant I pretty much was focused on, I had one kind of content hole to fill. I was publishing video. I had post-game press conferences, and I had stories that I was writing, and I was managing the roster pages and different things, but it was all about the website. And then in 2005, I started a podcast. So then I had a podcast, but that was kind of it. And then all of a sudden, there's social media. And then you've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram. You got to think about Snapchat. You got to think about Instagram. Instagram is like 3 platforms in one because you've got Reels and you've got the native, the main grid, and you've got Instagram stories. So you just have so much to think about in terms of where you're going to publish. You still have to worry about your website as well. So there's so many channels. There's so much in terms of strategy that you have to think about. Analytics wasn't something, of course, back in the day I thought about, how much traffic are we getting to our website and what pages are most popular. But now we have whole departments that are crunching numbers on your social media engagement, and you have different KPIs is the hot acronym, your key performance indicators. What are your video views? What's your engagement rate? Things like that. It's just become a lot more scientific. It's become a lot more complicated, and that's fun, but there's also just a lot more to worry about. And then I think the last thing I'd add is it's just become then a lot more specialized too, right? I was a one-person content team for 7 years. I did all that stuff. I had interns, and I started to develop a small staff early on, but for the most part, even when social media started, I was focused on social. I was focused on the web. I was doing the podcast. When I left the Blackhawks, I had people that were devoted. Like I had one person who was just thinking about Instagram. I had one person who was pretty much just thinking about Twitter, and one person who was thinking about Facebook because the channels demanded it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the rise of social media kind of changed. You would say there's much more roles in the front office now for that.
For sure.
Was there ever a marketing campaign that really took off, and was there ever one that flopped, and what did you learn from both of those?
Yeah, I'd definitely rather talk about the one that took off, the one that was great. I was very fortunate in that after 6 or 7 years of no success whatsoever, around 2008, we got very good. The Blackhawks got very good, and we stayed very good for a while. From 2008 until 2017, we were a very good team. And in that span, we won 3 Stanley Cups, 2010, 2013, and 2015. And so what that meant, what our team president used to say back then, and he's right, and I still say this in my classes all the time, winning is still the greatest marketing invention ever, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are, how many great ideas you have, how great your staff is. If you're winning, it can make up for a lot of mistakes that you're making. There's interest in your team. People are paying attention. Fans are passionate. And so everything's going to be good when you're winning, right? And we had it good for a long time. How that manifested itself for me is, I came from a background where I like to produce content. I like to produce creative content. I wanted to have fun. I wasn't in it so much for the marketing side. Like, I didn't really want to sell tickets. I didn't really want to produce ticket advertising if I could avoid it. Well, we had a run where we had 555 sellouts in a row, and we didn't have to work that hard to sell tickets. Other teams in the league had to work hard to sell tickets. They were devoting a lot of energy to selling tickets. We got to devote a lot of time to just producing fun content with our players, fun behind-the-scenes type of content. And how this ties back to the campaign is when our new leadership took over in 2008, the campaign that was developed was one goal. And we said, we're going to be all about one goal. We want to win championships. We want to be about excellence. We want to be a premier franchise on and off the ice. So our one goal is to win. And the offshoot of that was, what's your goal? Eventually, you can only say so many times, one goal, one goal, one goal, even after you've achieved the one goal, So how many different variations can you have on that? And somewhere around maybe 2013, 2014, working with our marketing agency, an outside agency that consulted us, we as an organization came up with, what's your goal? And we turned it over to the fans and we said, okay, we've told you what our goal is. What's your goal? What are the things that you're passionate about? What are your dreams? What are your aspirations? What are the things you care about? And these could be things like, I just want to go to my first Blackhawks game. Or it could be something way more emotional than that, right? And we got flooded on social media. We'd use the hashtag, what's your goal? And we got flooded on social media with people saying, this is my goal. And so then we started to make those goals happen. We started to make those dreams come true. And we, in working with that agency, produced some really wonderful videos. Videos that actually, the first one we did, we called Christina, working with this girl who was just such a huge Blackhawks fan, and she listened to every game, but she had some disabilities, including she was blind, and she got to come to her first ever game and go out on the ice and feel what it was like to be on the ice before a game with her favorite player, and then be in the broadcast booth for part of the game and cheer when we scored a goal and heard our goal song, Chelsea Dagger. It was really emotional, and when we unveiled that video, it was like a 90-second video, ESPN played it on SportsCenter that night. Like, they played the whole thing and brought on their hockey guy, Barry Melrose, at the time to talk about it. Like, just to talk about it. And they got a little teary-eyed, So that campaign was really special. And I was a part of a lot of those video shoots, and getting to make those kind of dreams happen and see people, how they reacted to those moments. That was really, really wonderful. So one goal and what's your goal? That was so great to have a campaign where we had one campaign for over a decade, and we didn't have to keep trying to reinvent ourselves. We were really fortunate. Unfortunately, after 2017, right, we were back sort of in rebuilding mode, and we were struggling a little bit to redefine ourselves. And it wasn't a case, I would say, I would single out one campaign. I would just say, when you're no longer the team that you were before, but you're not ready to let go of that. Like, you still want to be the winners that you were. You still want to project that image to your fan base, but the team on the ice is no longer that team. Then there's that disconnect, and so you start reaching a little bit. And I'll just say we were in the marketing wilderness for 3 or 4 or 5 years, where all of a sudden we went from one goal to like always one goal and believe in one goal. And then it was like all for one. And, we just really, really struggled for a few years trying to figure out what our new identity was.
How big of a struggle would you say redefining a team is? Like you mentioned, the 6-7 years before the Blackhawks were really good, and then previous years after 2017. What was kind of the struggle in the office space, and how do you guys try and come up with ideas together?
Yeah, I mean, there were many struggles, but I think one of them fundamentally is, like I said, is just it's sports. So you can't, no matter how much communication you have with your hockey department, or if it's a baseball team, your baseball department. And we had great communication. This is one of the fundamental issues in sports in general, is there is usually a disconnect there. A lot of times there's silos in sports teams where the people in the baseball side of the office don't really want to hear from the marketing people, and the marketing people usually don't want to hear from the baseball team. Like, there's sometimes mistrust, they don't communicate well, and we didn't have that. Our team president at the time, John McDonough, came in and said, we aren't going to win and be successful if we have those silos. So business and hockey are just going to have to, you're going to have to trust each other. You're going to have to work well together. You're going to communicate. You're going to share information. You're going to trust each other. And we did. But even with all that trust, you still don't know how the team's going to perform. And so you can go into a season thinking, hey, believe in one goal. We're still striving for championships. We think we still can be good. And then the team goes out and doesn't have a good year. If you're a fan and you're watching all of our marketing stuff and we're saying, hey, believe that we're still that dynasty that we were, but the team on the ice is clearly not that dynasty anymore. That's where then fans start to mistrust you. And I think that's where you can get into trouble a little bit. So that disconnection between the product and between what you're selling, so to speak, from a marketing standpoint, that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense, especially when, going through the rebuild, it doesn't add up to what's going on the ice. What did a typical game day look for you? Can you take us through the timeline there?
Sure. I mean, it certainly changed over the years as my role evolved with the team. And when I was a one-person content team, that meant if it was a game day, that let's say it's a home game, you're going to have morning skate. So first of all, I am expected to be at work at 9 a.m., so I'd get to work. If you were the home team, you're going to have morning skate at 10:30. So I'd get there at 9. I'd start to get ready for morning skate. Morning skate is kind of like, a batting practice in baseball. They're going to just go through some drills. That's really about it. It's like a practice, but not really a hard practice, And then the visiting team will take the ice after that. And I'd get ready. I'd think about storylines. I think about what questions I might want to ask the coach after practice. And I would then watch the morning skate, and I'd pay attention to what's happening on the ice. You'd get a sense of who's going to start, what lines, who's playing with who, whatever the key kind of matchups might be. And then there'd be, after that, they'd open the room and there'd be media availability. So I'd go in with my camera, and I would ask questions. I'd shoot content. I'd get interviews, and then the coach would speak to the media, usually out in the hallway, or it'd be more of a press conference style. I'd have to shoot that. And then I'd have to go up to my desk and I'd spend the next 2 or 3 hours exporting that, getting that video downloaded and editing it and uploading it to the website. And then I was the web manager, so I was the person then adding that all to the website and publishing it. And then when social media came along, you'd have to share those links on social media and get those published out. Then you had the afternoon to kind of just get ready for game day, get ready for the game that night, take care of all the other business things that you had to do as someone working for the front office. But then once the game hit, you'd have dinner, and then you would head up to the press box. And you'd watch the game from the press box. And if you were live tweeting the game or doing work like that, you'd have to do that as the game was going on. Otherwise, you were mostly watching, getting ready for the end of the game. And that meant at the end going down and kind of repeating the media stuff that you were doing pregame. Is after morning skate, just getting all the content you could to share with fans later. And in the old days, I didn't go home. I really didn't go home most nights I didn't get home until sometimes like 1 or 2 a.m. because technology wasn't what it is now. Back when I started, the internet wasn't as high speed as it is now, and just technology in general was different. So it meant even just doing photo galleries and things like that took a lot longer. It wasn't like it is now with video where you just have files on a card and you drag them over to your desktop and then edit them. I actually had to capture the video in real time. So if I had a 10-minute press conference, I had to then capture that 10-minute press conference in real time. I had to ingest that into my computer and then edit it, right? And then wait for it to export. So that took a long time. As I moved up and as I had more of a staff, I had, and they had all those channels to worry about, and there was way more things going on around the Blackhawks and around our content. A lot of times, honestly, at the end of my career with the Blackhawks, when I was in charge of marketing and content, I spent most of the game actually in my office, and I was watching what we were doing on our social channels, keeping an eye on it, and I was also listening to and watching the broadcast, and I was making sure that we weren't missing anything. Any key storylines, or there was any content, any special moments that were kind of happening in the game that you might not see when you're sitting in the press box or if you're in the arena, but on TV they're capturing or talking about. And so sometimes things would happen, and then I would send a Slack, I'd send a note to my staff and be like, hey, they're talking about this on the broadcast. We got to get this video, or we got to get this moment. And then I'd go up to scoreboard and say, hey, can you help us get this? Or whatever it was. I was kind of I was more like at the command center, keeping an eye on everything and just trying to be a resource for my staff to make sure that we were producing all the best stuff that we could.
You kind of became more of the overseer
Yes.
of your whole staff as they grew,
That's right.
as you went on. So you obviously also have a podcast. You worked for the team and had a team podcast, but you also have FilmSpotting. Would you like to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, whose idea was it to start that whole thing?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what it was. I was at work. There is an overlap here with the Blackhawks, not just that I started a sports podcast and the film podcast roughly the same time, but there's overlap in that one day I was at my desk at work and my boss, I can tell you it was mid-February, late February 2005. So you guys weren't even born yet when this happened. And my boss came to me. I can still remember him coming around the corner of my cubicle, and he just handed me a magazine, and it was Wired magazine, one of these tech, it's still around, one of these tech magazines. And it had this guy on the cover named Adam Curry. Now, you guys don't know who Adam Curry is, but I did because back in the days when MTV was a thing, he was a VJ. He was one of their personalities. I knew who he was. Well, he was like the first podcaster. And he was on the cover, and the headline said something like, Adam Curry wants to make you an iPod radio star. And I didn't have any idea what that was referring to. At that time, I had never heard of the word podcasting. Again, this is February 2005. Turns out the word podcasting had been used the first time like October 2004. So this is really, really, really new. I had never heard it at this point. And he handed it to me because he knew I was the web guy. I was the digital guy. He knew I did radio. I did a show here at the University of Iowa when I was a grad student getting my master's degree. And he thought, I got to give this to Adam. Who knows? Maybe Adam will do something with it. He handed it to me. I read the story. And I will admit to you that even though my first thought should have been about the Blackhawks, my first thought actually was about film because I've just always had such a passion for it. And I had this great friend at the time, Sam, and he's still one of my great friends. We loved film. We loved talking about film. And for a while, we loved writing about film. We had a blog. But, when no one's reading it or only 10 or 20 people are reading it, or you guys are probably starting a podcast, right? You're doing a podcast, and it's more fun if you're getting engagement, if people are listening, and it matters, right? And so we were really like, man, no one's reading this blog. Can we justify doing it? And we just kind of stopped, and then we realized we're not even watching movies anymore because we don't have time. We're busy with our lives. We need an excuse to watch movies. And so when I read that article and I learned about it, and I'm like, okay, wait. Basically, this means I don't need a radio station to say, hey, Adam, I'll hire you or whatever to put you on our airwaves. I can just produce my own show, and people, if they want to listen to it, can download it and listen to it on their iPods, because this is before iPhones and smartphones. But we all had iPods at the time to listen to music. I'm like, okay, this would be better than doing a blog, because I don't have to write. Writing takes a lot longer for me than talking. And I love to write, but I'm very slow. And Sam and I both had radio backgrounds. And so I read that article. I said, okay, I don't have this figured out just yet, like the technology, but I know I could. And I want to do this. And I also thought, if we get in early enough, like if I don't know what podcasting is, then definitely most people don't know what podcasting is. And if we get in early enough, what if we got in early enough and did a good show and actually got noticed? Maybe we'd build an audience. That was my thought. I guess I was at least savvy enough to think that. And so I called Sam. I picked up my phone. I called Sam at his job. And I do remember saying to him, Sam, do you want to be an iPod radio star? And he goes, yeah, I mean, I don't know what that is, but, yeah, that sounds great. And so I explained it to him. I explained to him there's this thing called podcasting, and you can deliver files, audio files, right to a phone. And this is kind of all it takes. And he said, yeah, let's try it. And so we talked about it. I did some more research. I figured out how it worked, that you had to make an MP3 file and what equipment, the basic equipment you needed, and how you would publish your podcast feed and RSS feed. I just figured that part out. Again, had to do some research, but I figured that part out. And so we just decided, okay, let's try it. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and we recorded it. And we used to record all the early shows. we recorded the show. I had asked my boss for permission. We recorded our early shows in a conference room at the United Center because that was the only quiet place I knew to go and record. And so that's where we did it, in a conference room, sitting across from each other, not unlike a table like this that we're talking at. And we had our little mixer and my computer and our microphones, and we didn't know what we were doing. Of course, this is brand new, and we didn't even know how it would work for sure. But I will tell you, and, I've seen you guys talk to each other this week, and I heard you guys on the podcast, even though you were separate, that you did in class. And, you guys have some natural chemistry, like you guys do. You guys work really well together and seem to have a natural presence on the mic. That's how Sam and I, we felt it right away. Within 2 minutes, we were like, oh, this works. This is fun. This feels like we're just having a conversation with each other, but it feels like something people might actually want to listen to. And so then the crazy part is that's that first recording, that's episode 1. At that point, Apple doesn't even have podcasting in iTunes yet. That's how new podcasting is. And, I could never imagine at that point when I started it. Yes, I thought, well, maybe we could get an audience. Maybe. But I certainly never would have thought that 20 years later, I'd be sitting here talking to you guys about FilmSpotting. I would have produced over 1,000 episodes, that it would still be going, that we'd have the audience that we have, that we're also broadcast on the NPR affiliate in Chicago. It's been a crazy ride. And yes, I did start the Blackhawks podcast at the same time too. I've just been a guy who's always been passionate about both sports and film, and I didn't want to choose one, so I did both.
That's awesome. I think I can relate to that in this podcast and hopefully grow it as you guys did. I think that's definitely something I look forward to.
So you've had this going for 20 years at this point. What has kept it so consistent over those 20 years?
The answer is probably partly in the question. First of all, it is just consistency. And this is the biggest advice I'll give to any podcaster. And I think you guys are already doing it if the fact is you've already done 25 shows. And I don't know how long ago did you start those shows?
December.
Okay. That's a very good start. One thing Sam and I did early on was we said, even if no one's listening when we start, and look, we had to send emails to our friends and family and be like, this is what a podcast is, and we're doing one now. Here's how you can download this. Nobody knew. But we still said, we're going to treat this like it's our job. It's not. We're not getting paid for it. It's secondary to what our real jobs are. But we're going to treat it like it matters. Every week, we're going to come prepared. We're going to do it every week. We're not going to miss a week. Now, of course, now we do occasionally miss a week. I'm going on vacation next week with my family. I don't take a lot of vacation time. I'm going on vacation with my family. My host is going to have a guest host. So, of course, we occasionally have weeks off. But at that time, as we were starting, we said, well, if we take weeks off, then maybe our audience will say, we can take weeks off. We'll go listen to other people. So we approached it like we got to churn shows out every week. And we got to churn them out at the same time so people can start to count on it. It's not like one show comes out on Monday and then the next week it comes out on Wednesday. Nope. At the time, it was like every Sunday at noon or whatever, we're going to publish a show. Even though it's not like TV or radio where like people are listening at different times, you still know that like that's when you can get it. Starting Sunday at noon. Now it's Friday at midnight is when we publish. So consistency was a big part of it, just taking it very seriously and like turning out a show every week at the same time. And having a format and a structure that we stuck to keep it consistent. The other part of it is just making sure you're working with people that you enjoy working with and that it's still fun. Like as long as it's still fun, and even after 20 years and all these episodes, and I'm working now actually with my third co-host, but my original co-host, Sam, is the producer of the show. And he's been the producer of the show for 12 years or 13 years or more. And my current co-host is someone who's co-hosted the show, I think, for 13 years, so he's a lifer at this point. Every week, no matter how stressed out I am about preparing for the show and all the other things I have going on in my life and feeling like maybe I don't have it this week. Am I going to have enough to say? Am I going to sound smart enough, this week? Once we hit the record button and start talking to each other, it's fun. I enjoy the give and take with each other. We're going to have a good conversation. And the other thing I'll say, because Sam says this a lot, and I think it's the best summation of the show and our approach. And I think this can work for anything. Granted, film is a little bit more serious, perhaps a little bit more high-minded than sports, but I think it can work. I think it's good advice across the board. We've always said that we take movies seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, right? And so we're going to come prepared every week. We're going to try to have really thoughtful conversations, but it's always going to be about the movies. It's never going to be about us and how smart we think we are, or like about the argument we're having with each other. It's just always going to be about, like, can we have a good conversation about this movie? That's always the thing that we're fundamentally most concerned about. And you know what? There actually is one more thing. It's the community. That's the great thing about podcasting is people, I talk about this in my podcasting classes a lot. People, because you're in people's headphones. It's not like radio. People develop a real connection to the people they hear in their headphones, especially if they're listening week after week or day after day or whatever it is. And they start to really feel like they get to know you. And we have listeners now who, we had a big festival for our 20th anniversary in Chicago where we had, a couple nights, we had 700 people at a theater. And some of those people are listeners who came from England, came from other countries. People came from all over this country to come be part of this, but also to come hang out with each other, and we know so many of these people by name. My co-host just actually went to Japan for 2 weeks with his wife for an anniversary, I think, and they had a meetup with 8 of our listeners in Japan. I went on a trip with the Blackhawks we opened the season once and had a game in, where did we have a game? I was going to say Oslo, but that's where Josh went, my co-host. We had a game in Helsinki, Finland, and I had a meetup with 4 listeners in Helsinki, Finland. So those kind of connections that you make and just having that community around the show, that's what keeps you going too, is feeling like, oh man, we got to make sure we keep doing the show and that we bring it every week, because you don't want to let people down, kind of, because the show really means something to them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to realize that you have listeners on all reaches of the earth is insane in Japan and Finland. So that must be like a super surreal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of going off that movie theme, a little bit off the podcast, but what would you say, kind of a tough question here, what's your favorite movie?
It's a great question. I had a feeling I might get asked this. And I sometimes hate giving the answer only because it feels so cliche. And usually, there's plenty of pop culture jokes about like the film bros who always say The Godfather. But I legitimately love The Godfather, and it probably is the best movie ever made. And I don't know if you guys are on the platform Letterboxd or not. Great platform, great app where you can log all the movies you see, and you can write reviews, and you can comment and have it's a community. It's a really nice community there on Letterboxd. They actually, you don't have to do it, but they give you the option of, when you sign up for your profile, they let you put your 4 favorites. Your 4 favorite movies. And some people don't want to pick their 4 favorites of all time, so they just do like their 4 favorites right now, or their 4 favorites of the past year, or they'll switch them out regularly. I've had the same 4 for a while, and I can remember at least 3 of them right now, and one of them is The Godfather. The other one is Before Sunrise, which is a film by Richard Linklater with Ethan Hawke, a movie from the 90s that, if you guys haven't seen it, you got to check it out, especially as you're entering. You guys are still young, but it's a movie about people in their early 20s going off and kind of traveling around Europe and meeting and making a real connection. It's a rite of passage. It's a rite of passage movie for people who are in their early 20s. So you'll get there. And another movie I love is a movie called All That Jazz, which is based on a true story of Bob Fosse, who is the guy who directed. He directed All That Jazz, so it's autobiographical, but he also directed Cabaret. He was a legendary Broadway choreographer and director, and this is a movie about his life, semi-autobiographical movie about his life and his life in the theater. And it's just one of those films that has always, for some reason, spoken to me, because I like movies that are about the artistic process and about artists and the choices they make and some of the compromises they make. So All That Jazz, Before Sunrise, The Godfather, those are 3 of my favorites.
That's a good list. I haven't seen Before Sunrise or all that jazz you were mentioning, so I'll definitely have to check those out from the film expert himself.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we're going to start to wrap things up here. Do you have any advice on how to grow an audience? Because as you just mentioned, you now have listeners all over the planet that you get to meet up with. How did you, in the beginning, get out of just being a small-knit community of people you know listening? How did you break through that? And I feel like it would be easier for us now with social media.
Yeah, it definitely can be. There are a lot more avenues to be promoting your show than there were back when we started. But the trade-off there is, and I do joke with people sometimes when they ask me this question, I kind of want to say, you need to build a time machine and go back to 2005 and get lucky, because we did partly luck, but also partly by design. We started so early that we were about 6 months ahead of iTunes. And then when iTunes launched, because we had a history of shows, we had a catalog of shows, and our show was good enough quality. When iTunes launched, they were sharing podcasting with the masses, right? That was the world was going to see podcasting, be confronted with podcasting for the first time. So Apple was like, we need to pick shows that are good quality so that people go, oh, I actually want to sample these, right? And not just go, oh, this sounds like really bad amateur radio, right? That was their thinking. And without us even knowing it, they chose our show to feature. So we were like one of the first 16 shows that was featured on iTunes when it dropped. And I found out about it only because I showed up at work that morning and I got an email from one of my colleagues at another team, I think the Washington Capitals, and he was like, congratulations. And I didn't know what he was talking about, but he saw my name on the podcast. And then I checked my email and I had another email from our podcast hosting company that was like, you've exceeded your bandwidth and we're shutting down your website. So we were not prepared, obviously, but we went from a couple hundred listeners to 10,000 or more overnight because of that. So we were fortunate in that regard. But the fact is, and we do talk about this in my podcasting classes here, we talk about marketing your show. The first thing you need to do is what you guys are doing right now, which is not worry about that. Honestly, I know that sounds like kind of a cop-out, but you need to just worry about like doing the best show you can, making a show that like you care about, that you have fun doing, that you know you can consistently crank out like I talked about, that you know that your audience can count on, so that then when an opportunity does come, you've got a show that people want to listen to and talk about. That's the first thing you need to worry about. When people email me and they're like, we've been doing our show for 3 weeks but no one's really listening and we want a bigger audience, I'm like, well, 3 weeks isn't long enough. Like come back in 3 months, or honestly, maybe even 3 years. Come back after a little while longer and then start to worry about, you got to be in it at first just because you love doing it, really, before you can start worrying about the bigger picture. The consistency and the ritual aspect of it for your audience is huge. The other part of it is if you can spend a little bit of money, if you can find a little bit of budget, there are advertising routes you can take. There's advertising on Instagram and Facebook, Meta, where you can get your show in front of people, lots of people, for a relatively low amount of money. There's also one of the big things that a lot of shows do that our show has done too is promo swaps or episode swaps. So you find other shows like your show with similar size audiences and you say, hey, let's help each other out. We'll do a 30-second read for your show and promote you if you do a 30-second read in your show for us. Maybe we have similar interests. We both talk about sports or we both talk about film and we seem to have similar sensibilities. Let's help each other out. At some point in your show, you talk about us and why you think we'd be a good fit for your audience to check out, and we'll do the same for you. That's a very common thing. We do those all the time, where you're just helping each other out because that's the audience for your show, is people listening to other shows like yours. So, fish where the fish are and find other shows like yours and see if you can cross-promote each other.
I think that's a great idea. We'll definitely reach out. Dom, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm going to ask this question. We heard it a little bit earlier. Is it true that you had a mullet at 14?
I can't believe that Ty, my colleague, sold me out there. Yes, I absolutely had a mullet at 14 and probably at 13 too. And I suppose I'll give you just a little bit of context there. At that age, in my life. So I played in a band. I still play in a band. I'm a bass player and I play the guitar too. And I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a small town and I had friends, the same group of friends from grade school until now. And when we were in 7th grade, you'll actually appreciate this, Kevin, because you're from Jersey, and I know that the Bon Jovi guys are, John Bon Jovi grew up not too far away from you, okay? So I'm really dating myself here, but I was in junior high when the Bon Jovi album Slippery When Wet came out. And this was a mega breakthrough, just, huge hit album. And we became so obsessed with that album that we said, you maybe have heard this. I know you guys are young, but people like John Bon Jovi, they all credit the Beatles. They all say, we saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and all said, we got to form a band. For people like me, we heard Bon Jovi and said, we got to form a band. And we did. That's literally how it happened. Like, my best friend Matt was already a drummer, and my friend Ben was taking guitar lessons, and this guy Chad sang, and Jim played the guitar. So I was like, well, I guess they need a bass player, so I'll buy a bass and take bass lessons. That's literally how it started. And so we actually just played a show in our hometown a month ago. So here we are 30 plus years later, and we're still, the same 5 guys are still playing music together and still playing Bon Jovi songs, by the way, which is a lot of fun. So the point is, back at that age, we were emulating people like Bon Jovi, and we were incapable at that age of growing our hair out into that full hair metal, all that glory, the full sweep of it. The best we could do was have a little bit of party in the back with some business in the front. And so, yeah, there are pictures to prove it. I'm ashamed to admit.
No, that's definitely awesome. Good question there. But yeah,
Any plans to bring back the mullet?
No. I think the mullet is officially dead.
Retired.
Yeah, retired.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's about all the questions I have.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you so
Of
much
course.
for
This was a pleasure.
even this entire week. So anyone listening, Dom and I have been at the Iowa University School of Journalism and Mass Communications summer workshop program, and Adam was our professor this week, and we took a digital sports storytelling, and the entire week was amazing. So we just wanted to thank you and for coming on the show and giving us this opportunity. I think it's really amazing.
No, I appreciate hearing that. You guys were so fun to have this week, and it was great talking to you here.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
Thank you guys all for listening to episode 25 of Gridiron Across the U.S. Make sure to go check out Adam's podcast, FilmSpotter. He's been going strong there. Got to tune in when I get home. Anything you got to say, Kevin?
No, I guess we're signing off from Iowa City.
All right, see you in the next episode.